After my father's death, I didn't tell my stepmother that he had left me $30 million. What she did to me before that will explain why. Stay with me while I open my heart and tell you what really happened. And if it moves you, I'd be grateful if you could share it, like it, or even subscribe so more people can hear stories like mine. My name is Savannah Blake. I'm 27 years old, the only child from my father's first marriage. My father, Richard Blake, was not just a wealthy businessman in North Carolina. He was my rock, my best friend, and the one person who made me feel safe in this world. Losing him was like having the ground ripped out from under me. It happened so suddenly, a heart attack that no one saw coming. One moment he was full of life, planning a fishing trip with me, and the next I was standing at his funeral, unable to believe the world kept turning without him. At the service, people came up to me with gentle words, hugs, and tears. But every time I looked at my stepmother, Denise, something about her seemed wrong. She cried loudly for others to see, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. But the second no one was watching, her face hardened. She would glance at me, and instead of kindness, there was something sharp in her eyes, like a hidden anger I couldn't place. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself grief makes people act strangely, that maybe she didn't know how to show her feelings. After all, she was only 42, still young, and suddenly a widow. But as the days passed, little comments slipped out of her mouth, and they cut deeper than I expected. "You know, Savannah," she whispered to me the evening after the funeral, "your father always worried about how dependent you were on him. I suppose now you'll have to stand on your own 2 feet." It wasn't said with care. It was said like a jab, like she was already pushing me out of the life my father built for us. My chest burned with hurt, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to fight, not when I was still raw from losing Dad. But Denise didn't stop. At the house, she moved around like she owned every inch of it, greeting guests with a false warmth that melted away the second the door shut. When it was just the two of us, she would sigh and mutter things under her breath. "Your father spoiled you too much. Maybe now things will be different." Different. That word stuck with me. I felt her mask of kindness slipping, piece by piece, and it scared me. I had lost my father, and now it felt like I was losing the home he left me, too. And yet, Denise didn't know the truth, that my father had left me far more than memories. He had left me protected in a way she couldn't imagine. The days after my father's funeral were a blur of silence and aching emptiness. I tried to hold on to the little routines that reminded me of him. Making coffee the way he liked it, walking through his study where the smell of his cologne still lingered. But Denise was quick to shatter whatever peace I tried to find. Her mask of grief didn't last long. One evening, barely a week after the funeral, she cornered me in the living room. Her voice was calm at first, but her words carried poison. "Savannah, I think it's time you start making plans to leave. This house is mine now. You really don't have any right to stay here." My chest tightened. This was the home I grew up in. Every photo on the walls, every scratch on the wooden floor, carried pieces of my childhood. I stared at her, trying to process her cruelty. "Denise, this is my father's home." "My home," I said softly. She crossed her arms and gave me a cold smile. "No, your father left everything to me. You're just prolonging the inevitable. Don't embarrass yourself by clinging to what isn't yours." Her words were sharp, meant to wound. And they did. I had just buried my father, and here she was trying to bury me emotionally too. I wanted to scream at her that she was wrong, that she didn't know the truth about the will, but something inside me held back. I could almost hear my father's voice reminding me to be patient, to think before I reacted. Instead, I let her talk. And talk she did. Over the next few days, her cruelty became bolder. At breakfast one morning, she leaned back in her chair, sipping coffee like a queen in her castle. "You've always been a burden, Savannah. Your father gave you too much, and for what? You never made him proud. All you did was depend on him." I felt my throat tighten, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. She didn't know that my father used to brag about me to anyone who would listen. He told me over and over that I was his pride, his joy. Denise's lies were just her way of trying to erase that truth. Still, hearing her mock me, accuse me of being worthless, lit a fire deep inside. I had been raised to believe in fairness, in patience, in kindness. But Denise was pushing me to a place I never thought I would go. I stayed quiet about the will. I let her believe her words were cutting me down. But inside, I was already building something stronger than her venom. Each insult, each attempt to intimidate me, was another stone in the foundation of my resolve. She thought she was breaking me, but she was only planting the seed of the revenge she'd never see coming. Grief has a strange way of pulling you back into memories, as if your mind is desperate to hold on to the pieces of someone you love. After Denise's harsh words, I found myself retreating into the quiet corners of the house, searching for my father in the echoes of the past. I remembered being a little girl, sitting on the porch swing while Dad read the newspaper. He would set it down, smile at me, and say, "Savannah, you're the best part of my life." His voice always carried warmth, a certainty that made me feel safe. Even when the world outside felt heavy, he was my anchor. Those memories grew sharper now, especially because I could still hear his warnings. He hadn't trusted Denise fully, though he tried to shield me from it. I remembered once, maybe a year after their marriage, he pulled me aside. "Savannah," he said, his tone serious, "Denise enjoys nice things a little too much. She's not a bad person, but she doesn't always know when enough is enough." At the time, I brushed it off. I told him she was just adjusting, that maybe she'd grow into the role of stepmother. I wanted to believe the best. I wanted to believe she could love him for more than his money. But Dad saw what I didn't. He always had that protective instinct, always thinking 2 steps ahead. The clearest memory came from just a few weeks before his heart gave out. We were sitting in his study late one evening, the soft glow of the lamp between us. He looked tired that night, older somehow, though I didn't want to admit it to myself. He reached over, took my hand, and said something I'll never forget. "I've secured your future, no matter what Denise says. You'll be all right." At the time, I didn't understand the full weight of those words. I nodded, smiled, and thought he was just reassuring me the way he always did. But now, in the silence of the house that Denise was trying to strip bare, those words felt like armor wrapping around me. He had known. Somehow, he had seen what was coming, and he made sure I wouldn't be left unprotected. As Denise began removing pieces of my mother's old belongings, boxing them up like they were trash, I clung harder to those memories. She was trying to erase my presence from this house, as if I had no right to be a part of my father's story. But I knew better. My father had written me into his life with every memory, every conversation, every act of love. Denise could strip the walls, throw out the furniture, and toss away photographs. But she could never take away what my father left in me, his love, his lessons, and his promise. That promise would be the thing that carried me through her cruelty, even when she thought she had the upper hand. It didn't take long for Denise to show her real priorities. Within days of the funeral, she began tearing through the house like a storm. The warmth of my father's home vanished as new furniture arrived, flashy and modern, nothing like the simple, classic pieces he had chosen with such care. Family heirlooms, china passed down from my grandmother, old clocks that had ticked in our home for decades, were tossed into boxes and carted off. Worst of all, Denise carelessly threw away belongings that had once belonged to my mother. Dresses, photographs, jewelry, things that carried memories of a woman I barely got to know, all gone in the blink of an eye. I tried to stop her once, reaching for a framed photo of my mother in her wedding dress. Denise snatched it out of my hands. "This isn't your shrine, Savannah," she sneered. "We don't need clutter from the past." I stood frozen, grief burning into anger, but I swallowed it down. I told myself, not yet. Then came the parties. Just 2 weeks after burying my father, Denise filled the house with laughter, music, and glasses of wine. She dressed in black silk, playing the role of the grieving widow to her guests, but the charade was thin. Between fake sobs and dramatic sighs, she flaunted her new luxury handbags and whispered about expensive vacations she was planning to take once the inheritance cleared. I stood in the corner, unseen, watching her collect sympathy from neighbors while polishing her new diamond bracelet. Late one night, I caught her in my father's study. She didn't notice me standing in the hallway as she rifled through drawers, scattering papers across the desk. Her movements were frantic, desperate, like someone hunting for treasure. She muttered under her breath, "It has to be here somewhere." My stomach twisted. She was looking for documents, maybe the will, maybe account details. Whatever it was, she expected the house to hold her ticket to riches. The next morning, Denise brought in a lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit who looked at me with thinly veiled disdain. They sat me down in the dining room, papers spread out across the table. "Savannah," Denise said in her practiced sweet tone, "all of this is just a formality. Sign these papers, and we can finalize everything quickly. It's what your father would have wanted." I glanced at the papers and immediately knew something was wrong. The wording was vague, full of legal jargon, but the intent was clear. She wanted me to give up any claim. My hands shook as I pushed the pen away. I'm not signing anything. Her smile faltered, her eyes flashing with anger. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, realizing I wasn't as naive as she hoped. I stood, leaving the papers untouched. Inside, my heart pounded, but I stayed calm. Denise thought she was winning, but I knew something she didn't. My time would come. I just had to wait for the right moment. I still remember the weight of the envelope in my hands as I sat across from my father's attorney, Clinton Harris. His office was quiet, lined with shelves of heavy books and the smell of polished wood. My palms were damp, my heart pounding as he slid the papers toward me. "Savannah," he said gently, "your father was very clear about his wishes. He left everything to you. The estate, his businesses, the accounts. Altogether, it totals just over $30 million. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. $30 million. It didn't feel real, not because of the money itself, but because it was his final act of love. My father had been thinking of me even in his last days, making sure I would never have to depend on anyone, especially not Denise. I scanned the pages, my eyes blurring as the words confirmed it all. Denise's name wasn't there. Not one line, not one mention of her. Legally, she was left with nothing. A rush of emotions hit me at once, relief, sorrow, and a deep ache for the man who had loved me enough to protect me even after death. Clinton leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Savannah, I need you to understand something. When money like this is involved, people can become dangerous. I've seen it more times than I care to count. Greed changes people. It eats at them. You need to be cautious, especially around your stepmother." I nodded, his words sinking in like cold water. I had already seen the sharp edge of Denise's temper, the way her eyes burned when she thought she was in control. If she discovered the truth too soon, I wasn't sure what she might do. For a fleeting second, I imagined walking back into the house and dropping the papers on the table in front of her, watching her smugness shatter as she realized she had nothing. But something stopped me. A quiet strength stirred inside me. Revealing it now would be too easy. She would twist the story, play the victim, and maybe even find a way to manipulate the situation. No, if she wanted to show her true colors, I was going to give her the time and space to do it. I folded the papers carefully and slid them back into the envelope. "Thank you, Mr. Harris," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "For now, I think it's best if we keep this between us." He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Your father always said you were strong. I think he knew you'd handle this wisely." As I left the office, clutching the envelope to my chest, I felt the weight of my secret. Denise thought she was winning, parading around as if everything already belonged to her. But the truth was mine alone, and I wasn't going to waste it. I would let her dig her own grave, one cruel act at a time, before I finally revealed what my father had left behind. The shift from cold remarks to outright cruelty happened faster than I expected. One evening, I returned from a walk to find the locks on the front door had been changed. I stood there with my key in my hand, jiggling it against the metal, only to realize it no longer fit. My chest tightened with panic until I pounded on the door and Denise finally appeared, smirking in her silk robe. "Oh, Savannah," she said sweetly. "I thought you decided to move out. I had the locks replaced. You'll need to knock if you want to come inside." I clenched my fists, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me beg. "This is my father's house," I told her firmly. Her smirk only widened. She didn't let me in until she was good and ready, as if she were training me to know my place. It didn't stop there. Denise had always loved gossip, but now she weaponized it. I overheard neighbors whispering, voices carrying down the street. Poor Denise, having to care for Richard's daughter. She's still living there, not paying for a thing. The words stung. Denise was painting me as some spoiled leech, living off her generosity. No one knew the truth, that I had every right to be in that house, that it wasn't hers to begin with. The deepest cut came when I discovered she had sold some of my mother's belongings. A necklace my father had kept safe for me, a locket my mother wore in every photo I had of her. It was all gone. When I confronted Denise, her reply was ice cold. "They were just trinkets, Savannah. You need to stop holding on to the past. Besides, I needed the cash." Her eyes glittered with satisfaction as she watched the hurt register on my face. But she wasn't finished. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table working on designs for a small business I'd been dreaming of starting. My father had always encouraged me to chase it, even offering advice about branding and investment. Denise glanced at my sketches and laughed, actually laughed. You, running a business? Don't make me laugh, Savannah. You're nothing without your daddy's money. Without him, you're nobody. Her words pierced me, but this time, the pain transformed into something stronger. Every cruel act, every rumor, every stolen memory was fueling a fire inside me. She thought she was breaking me down piece by piece, but she was only showing me exactly who she was. And that gave me power. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I learned to nod, to stay silent, to let her believe she was winning. But inside, I began to plan. I knew I couldn't keep the truth from her forever, but when I finally revealed it, it wouldn't just be between the two of us. It would be public, undeniable, and devastating. She wanted to erase me, but I was going to make sure she erased herself. It didn't take long for Denise's greed to start spilling out into the open. She strutted around the house with the confidence of someone who thought millions were already sitting in her bank account. Packages arrived at the door almost daily. Designer handbags, expensive shoes, even furniture she didn't need. She booked spa appointments, hired decorators, and talked nonstop about the upgrades she planned for the estate. Her favorite pastime, though, was bragging. I'd hear her on the phone with her friends, her voice high and giddy. Once everything clears, I'll finally take that trip to Paris. Maybe buy a villa in Italy. Oh, and I've been eyeing some investment properties. Why not start flipping houses? She spoke as if the money was already hers, as if my father's life's work was just waiting to be spent on her whims. At first, I thought her arrogance would be her undoing on its own. But then I started noticing little things that didn't add up. Bills left carelessly on the counter, late payment notices stuffed into drawers, credit card statements with balances that made my stomach twist. The woman who flaunted wealth was, in reality, drowning in debt. One night, curiosity pulled me further. While Denise was out with her friends, I slipped into her office space. Her desk drawers were a mess of unopened envelopes and overdue balances. I scanned them quickly. Tens of thousands owed to banks, loans taken out under her name, and credit cards maxed out beyond repair. But that wasn't all. A stack of casino receipts and gambling slips revealed another secret. She wasn't just spending, she was losing. The picture was becoming clearer. Denise wasn't the wealthy widow she pretended to be. She was a desperate woman teetering on the edge of collapse. And she thought my father's fortune was her lifeline. But the final discovery was the one that truly stunned me. Buried in her email inbox, left open carelessly on her tablet, were messages that didn't read like business correspondence. They were intimate, romantic. They were from a man named Tyler, at least 10 years younger than her. The tone was flirtatious, full of promises and demands. He asked her for money, hinted at fun weekends they'd share once she got her inheritance sorted. My stomach turned. My father hadn't even been gone a month, and here she was, funneling money to another man behind his back. I quietly began to gather it all. I photographed the debt letters, saved copies of the emails, and kept a record of her gambling losses. Every piece of evidence was another brick in the wall I was building, a wall that would eventually cave in and bury her. Denise, meanwhile, paraded through town with her head held high, bragging about a future she thought was already hers. She didn't realize she was tightening her own noose, one purchase and one secret at a time. And I was there, patient and silent, preparing the moment when her perfect facade would shatter for everyone to see. The day Denise decided to corner me felt like the final act of her performance. She called me into the dining room where her lawyer was waiting, the same slick man she had introduced before. The table was neatly set with stacks of papers, a pen laid carefully on top as if it were some kind of prize waiting for me to claim. Denise sat at the head of the table, her posture stiff, her expression smug. "Savannah," she began in her sugar-coated tone, "we've gone over this before. These documents will make everything smoother. Once you sign, there won't be any confusion about the estate. It's just business." I sat across from her, keeping my face neutral even though my stomach churned. The lawyer gave me a rehearsed smile and slid the papers closer. "It's all straightforward," he said, though the vague legal jargon suggested anything but. Denise leaned forward, her eyes glinting with triumph. "I know this has been hard on you," she continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But your father always wanted me to take care of things. You don't need the burden of all this. Let me handle it, and you can move on with your life." I lowered my gaze to the documents, flipping a page or two as if I were seriously considering them. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for her confidence to build. Denise mistook my calm for hesitation, and the corners of her mouth curled into a victorious smile. See, you're being reasonable now. You know this is the right thing to do. Inside, my heart hammered, but I kept my breathing steady. I tapped the pen against the table, then looked up at her. You're awfully sure of yourself, Denise, I said softly. Her smile widened. Why wouldn't I be? Your father trusted me. He left everything to me. That was when I let it slip, the truth I had been holding close like a secret weapon. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and met her gaze. That's funny, because I've read the will, Denise. And it doesn't say your name anywhere. Not once. The smugness drained from her face in an instant. Her smile faltered, her eyes darting to her lawyer as if he might rescue her. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly realizing this wasn't going the way they planned. You're lying, she stammered, but her voice lacked the sharpness it usually carried. I shook my head slowly, keeping my tone calm, deliberate. No, I'm not. I know exactly what my father left behind. Everything. The estate, the businesses, the accounts. All of it is mine. And you've had nothing all along. Her face went pale, her bravado slipping like a mask torn away. For the first time, Denise looked small. Weak. The realization flickered across her features. She had never had power over me. Not once. I didn't hand her the papers. I didn't need to. Just watching her crumble under the weight of the truth was enough. And I knew this was only the beginning of her unraveling. I decided that if Denise was going to be exposed, it wouldn't happen in private. She had paraded her lies in front of neighbors, friends, and anyone who would listen. So it was only fitting that the truth be revealed in the same way. I planned a memorial dinner in my father's honor, inviting the very people Denise loved to impress. She thought it was her chance to play the grieving widow once more, but I had a different stage set in mind. The night of the dinner, the house was filled with voices and clinking glasses. Denise wore black satin, a pearl necklace around her throat, smiling as if she were the queen of the evening. She welcomed guests, telling exaggerated stories about my father, acting as though she had been his everything. I let her enjoy the spotlight for a little while. Let her bask in her false glory. When the room grew quiet, I rose from my chair and tapped my glass. Thank you all for coming tonight, I said, my voice steady though my heart was pounding. We're here to honor my father, Richard Blake. He believed in truth, in honesty, and in family. Tonight, I want to share something he left behind. I held up the envelope, the weight of the will heavy in my hands. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I unfolded the pages. Denise's smile faltered, but she still tried to keep her mask in place. Reading aloud, I spoke every word clearly. I, Richard Blake, leave my estate, my businesses, and all my accounts in their entirety to my daughter, Savannah Blake. To my wife, Denise Blake, I leave nothing. The room went silent, then erupted in gasps. Eyes darted from me to Denise, whose face had drained of color. Her hands trembled as she clutched her wine glass, struggling to maintain composure. But the truth was written, undeniable, and in front of everyone she had ever fooled. Whispers turned into shocked conversations, people staring at Denise with pity and suspicion. She tried to laugh it off. This must be a mistake, she stammered. But I wasn't finished. I reached into a folder and began laying out the evidence I had collected. Overdue credit card bills, gambling slips, printed emails between her and her much younger lover. One by one, I spread them across the table like cards in a game she could no longer win. While Denise was pretending to honor my father's memory, I said firmly, she was drowning in debt, gambling away money, and funding an affair behind his back. Gasps turned into murmurs of disgust. Friends she once bragged to avoided her gaze. Neighbors she had manipulated shook their heads. The lawyer she trusted had quietly slipped out the door. Denise's world collapsed in front of her. No allies left, no fortune to cling to. By the time the night ended, creditors would be calling, her so-called friends would be gone, and her reputation would be nothing but ash. And I stood there, calm and unshaken, watching the woman who had tried to erase me be erased instead. Denise's downfall came faster than I could have imagined. Within weeks of that dinner, the creditors she had been hiding from were at her door. Friends who once filled her living room with laughter no longer returned her calls. The woman who had strutted through my father's house in pearls and expensive gowns now packed her clothes into boxes, her face hard and bitter. The mansion she had claimed as her kingdom was no longer hers. She tried to argue, to slam doors, to spit words meant to cut me, but the truth was undeniable. This was my father's home, and he had entrusted it to me. Watching her leave, dragging suitcase after suitcase across the driveway, I didn't feel the triumph she had always accused me of craving. Instead, I felt relief. Relief that the weight of her cruelty was no longer pressing down on me. When the last box was gone and her car finally disappeared down the road, silence filled the halls. For the first time since my father's death, the house felt like home again. I walked through each room slowly, running my fingers along the furniture, breathing in the memories. The photographs of my mother that Denise had hidden were back on the mantel. My father's study, once rifled through in greed, was neat and untouched. It felt like I was reclaiming more than a house. I was reclaiming him. Taking over his businesses was no small task, but it gave me purpose. His employees, who had looked at me with uncertainty at first, began to see the same determination in me that they had once respected in him. I worked late nights, not for the money, but to keep his legacy alive. Every decision I made was guided by his voice in my memory, calm, wise, and always believing in me. Sometimes I thought about Denise. I imagined her in a small apartment, no longer draped in luxury, perhaps still blaming me for her fall. But deep down, I knew she had destroyed herself long before I ever revealed the truth. I hadn't sought revenge. It had been forced into my hands. She had mocked me, belittled me, tried to erase me from my father's story. All I had done was refuse to disappear. Sitting by the window one evening, the sun sinking low across the North Carolina hills, I felt peace settle in me. It wasn't the $30 million that gave me comfort. It wasn't the house or the businesses or the accounts. It was the knowledge that my father's last promise, that I would be protected, had been kept. After my father's death, I didn't tell my stepmother he'd left me $30 million. Waiting to reveal, it was the sweetest justice I could give him. And in that silence, in the legacy he left behind, I finally found my peace. What do you think Savannah should have done? Was keeping the will a smart move, or should she have confronted Denise sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear your opinion. And if you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.